So here we go. Justin, we got Rob on the line. What do you want to ask him?
I've got a little bit of that residential background, but again, like I mentioned earlier, it's different from the commercial space, which is still somewhat intimidating. How would you advise somebody kind of in my shoes and taking steps in these early days? And part B of that is kind of how did you navigate that for yourself in your business?
Imperfect action beats perfect action. In other words, don't get caught up, making sure that everything is perfect. It's better just to go forward. Now, when you talk about analysis, the first thing that comes to mind is the underwriting. I can tell you from my experience, it developed my knowledge base and my ability to be able to sniff out a good deal from a bad deal, but it also developed my vernacular.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Four Oaks Capital. Super excited for today's show. I'm always excited for every show. I have a lot of fun when we do these. This is one of our Ask the Expert episodes. We have two great people on the line with us today. We got a guy with a ton of experience in commercial real estate, Rob Overstreet, and a very motivated, aspiring investor, Justin Getz. So first of all, Rob is a cash flow specialist, capital raiser, syndicator, real estate investor, and he's the CEO of Harbor Drive Holdings. His firm has successfully syndicated over $25 million of apartment real estate to date and focuses primarily on opportunities located in the Midwest and Sun Belt regions of the United States. He's got a background in hospitality business, and incidentally, I'll put his full bio in the show notes to check that out. But we're just going to say, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so excited to have you. And incidentally, for the listeners here, Rob was introduced to me by one of my partners. I think you guys are in a mastermind together. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
All right. Continually learning and honing your craft. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about you and your background. Tell us, where you came from and kind of, walk us through what got you into commercial real estate.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go ahead and start. In my college days, I'm originally from Southern California. I grew up in a community called Imperial Valley, which is east of San Diego, and went to school at San Diego State. I studied economics and I met my wife there, which is fantastic. So while I was in school, I was in the hospitality business, as you mentioned, restaurant hospitality. I worked for a company called Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, if you've ever heard of it.
I think most people have.
Yeah, great place.
Yep.
Good steak and just great atmosphere. It was a fantastic experience. And so I worked there, through college and a little bit beyond. And I tell people I got my PhD in hospitality, right? And communication there because, we're dealing with people and so forth. But, sometime during my tenure there, the company went public and they went on this expansion rampage. They were opening Ruth's Chris locations in every market. And so they asked me if I would start doing some corporate training. So they would send me to a variety of cities for, weeks at a time, where I'd help, train the staff, educate them on company culture, et cetera. And there were definitely opportunities for me to advance in that corporation. But deep down inside, I always had the entrepreneurial spirit. And so I started looking for other options. And so from there, I actually purchased a franchise business of a Minuteman Press, printing, graphic design, promotional products, all B2B stuff. And I operated that for several years. But during that period, I started to get involved in educating myself on real estate, passive income, wealth creation. And I guess that all started where probably most of us started, which was by reading the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? And, the concepts there just clicked and it just turned this light bulb on. And so started exploring, going to events, networking, in the real estate space, learning, reading every book I could get my hands on, and really just, started looking for a mentor that I could learn from and potentially partner with. And that's exactly what happened. I was at an event in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was a real estate related multi-day workshop type of deal and met some folks there. We connected, kept the dialogue going, started, looking at deals together, which led to putting in some offers together, which led to closing our first deal, which was a 79 unit apartment deal in Dallas.
Nice.
And from that point on, I was bit by the bug. And so we, started looking for more deals. We were trying to build the portfolio. We closed on a couple others. And about that time, my time commitment with my franchise business and my time commitment with my, growing real estate business were kind of tugging at opposite ends of each other. Right. And so
Yeah.
my wife and I made the decision that I was going to sell the franchise, Minuteman Press, and I was going to go 100% real estate because we believe that this was going to be the future for us, our family, and everything else. And so I've been full-time in the business now the past 3 years, which brings me to
Nice.
this show today.
Yeah, nice. I think a lot of people, have a similar, at least I did, so I've been active duty Marine Corps for a long time. And, when I started doing this on the side, it got to the point to where I realized that it was one or the other. When it was small and we had one property, it's easy to moonlight, but when you start scaling and gaining a lot of traction, at some point, I had to make the same decision. It's one or the other. And that's when I decided to retire 100%. But yeah, and I've been full time in this business for like 3 weeks now. So I'm excited to 3 years from now be in your position. That's awesome. Now your company right now is Harbor Drive Holdings. I know we talked a little bit about that. I think on Monday about why. But explain to everybody else why Harbor Drive Holdings.
Yes, thank you. I have one partner in this business. We're, joint co-founders of the company, and my partner and I met in my Ruth's Chris days. We both worked for the company, and over the years, we've both been involved together and separate in various different businesses, et cetera. And but he's one of my closest friends, and we started learning about real estate together, and so we formed Harbor Drive Holdings. And the significance behind the name is because the Ruth's Chris location that we both worked at originally was located on Harbor Drive in San Diego.
Yeah.
And I know, Brian, exactly where that is. Harbor Drive is this beautiful street that just kind of wraps around the San Diego Harbor waterfront. It's gorgeous. So
yeah, and I've lived in San Diego County for 7 years, I think. And I know Imperial Valley well as too. There's some Marine Corps training areas out there, but yeah, Harbor Drive is absolutely beautiful, and we spent a lot of time on that Harbor Drive. So, glad you could make that part of your company name. It really means something. So let's see. One thing that I like to ask everybody is, what is your big burning why? What's your motivation for doing what you do?
That's an easy one, Brian. It's my wife and my kids. I mentioned to you that I met my wife in college. We were both freshmen living in the dorms. I was in one side of the wing, and she was in another wing. And we dated about 10 years before we got married. So by the time we were engaged, I knew her family very well and everything else. And her father told me rather, it's about time, right?
Yeah, you better marry her.
So,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, 10 years dating, that's plenty. So we've been married now 10 years too. So, it's time flies. We've been together about 20 years, but fast forward, 2 kids. We have 2 beautiful children, a 5-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. And, my wife, my kids, that's my burning why. We feel that real estate investing and real estate investments are one of the best vehicles for wealth creation and positive income cash flow from your passive investments. So
love it. Yeah. Family is huge for me as well. And, I'll tell you, so far, this has allowed me to live where I want to live, where we just moved to Idaho Falls. 4 generations of Briscoes have called Southeast Idaho home, and now 5 and 6 with my kids. And then my wife's family lives here too. So, it's not a huge metro. There's about 100,000 people within 50-mile radius, but it's something that I wouldn't be able to do without real estate. If it wasn't for this multifamily business that we've created, I'd probably be sitting in the Pentagon right now looking at, where am I going next? What's my next assignment going to be? But it's given me more opportunities to write my own ticket, create my own path, so to speak. And I guess that's really what entrepreneurship's about. So not for everybody, but I'm glad we did it. Well, let's shift gears slightly here, and I'd love to hear about one of your deals, one of your properties. Pick your favorite one, pick your most recent one, but tell us about one of the things you've done.
I'll just share with you our most recent transaction. It's a little bit smaller deal. It's located in Hot Springs, Arkansas, outside of Little Rock. It's an 89 unit late 80s constructed apartment community. And this one I like because it's got really good cash flow. It's just a kind of down the fairway, no hair on it. The seller was actually BSR, which is a Little Rock based public REIT. They're traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And so I guess an experience to share there would be working with a really high quality seller. Because I can share some stories where we bought from not so nice sellers, and it can be a lot of heartburn, to say the least. And you probably know something about that. Buying a deal from a REIT was a real thrill. I mean, they had all their T's crossed, their I's dotted. The deal was in impeccable condition by the time it was delivered to us. Zero deferred maintenance, and really just a nice project. I mean, we closed on that one about a year ago, and it's just kind of steady Eddie down the fairway. A little bit of value add. We have a budget to do a handful of the units with a mild upgrade, some floors, some countertops, and appliances as needed. But it's not a real deep roll up your sleeves, opportunistic kind of a project. Just straight and narrow and just operate. So
yeah, there's lots of different philosophies to which investment opportunities you chase, but and you say that a lot of things were immaculately kept, but there's a lot of regulation that goes into the REITs, a lot of the financial reporting that they have to do to the SEC and whatnot. And I know that the REITs spend a lot of time and money making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So, when you mentioned that, that's what first came to mind. Is I bet you their financials were spot on, tracked down to the penny every time. And being REITs, I mean, they're not looking at, they're looking for steady cash flow too. And so a lot of goodness in there, and handed you guys a well-maintained property, which you guys were able to keep on doing the same with. So
yeah, clean financials. I mean, you could eat off of those T12s. I mean, they were just crystal clean. And what another cool thing is, you can put that on the resume. When I'm out there talking with brokers, and this, Brian, you get into a best and final situation, they start to ask some due diligence questions about you as a buyer, et cetera.
Yep.
Show me some references and things. I mean, when we've just put BSR down as one of our references, it carries a lot of weight, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that's something that distinguishes different investment groups. And I think if you put your broker or your seller hat on, there's a couple of things they're looking for. I mean, price is one, but I think most people are looking for a couple of things. Obviously, price is important, but they're also looking for somebody who is going to be a guaranteed close, and somebody who's not going to be, they're not going to be difficult. They're not looking for the drama queen, so to speak. So somebody who's easy to transact with, somebody who's going to guarantee the close and give you a good price. So when it comes down to that, if you got that letter recommendation from a big REIT saying, hey, we transacted with these guys, they're great, that's going to set you guys apart from maybe the next company who's giving a similar price with similar history. So
and Brian, that wasn't the intention, let's go buy a deal from a REIT. It just happened to work out that way, and they worked out to be. It was a very enjoyable experience, through the transaction. And I know that from experience that sometimes these transactions get a little hairy. So that one was about as clean as we could hope for.
Yeah. And we haven't sat in the seller's seat yet. We're about to be sellers on our first transaction here, but curious to see, what it's like when I'm actually in that seat. Right now I put my hypothetical seller's hat on. I've sold several single family investment properties, but never multifamily yet. But I can imagine there's lots of give and take on both sides, and hopefully we can be the non-difficult sellers when we finally sell too. So we'll see about that. So another question that I'd like to ask everybody: what's next for you?
Build the portfolio, right? And I know this. It's the two lowest common denominators in the business is deal flow and investor flow, and nurturing the investors in your database. And so, the playbook is quite simple. It's find good deals and find good investors that match up with you, right? And not all investors are a good match for us, and that's fine. And likewise, we're not a good match for all investors. So nurturing our investor contacts, our limited partners, in our database, and providing as much value to them as possible. We send out lots of resources to our investor community on an ongoing basis, and really just nurture them, and then provide them with, high quality investment opportunities. And if the timing is right, then great. And if it's not, that's fine too. So, those are the two things that we're focused on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Not every investor is right for you, and you're not right for every investor. And I think we talked a little bit about different investment philosophies. If you're a passive investor listening and trying to find a sponsor, find somebody who's aligned with your investment goals. Because one company may be looking to buy and hold and look for cash flow. Another company may look to do a value add and just try to maximize returns. They're different investment philosophies, and not every company is right for every person, and vice versa. I'm glad you brought that up. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, let's introduce our next guest. We got Justin Getz on the line. He's a father, husband, and a software account executive. He co-founded a company undertaking various residential operations in the peak of the 2008 recession. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. Fix and flips, new construction, buy and hold single family homes, and a couple other things. But now he's turning his attention into multifamily. So here we go. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And Rob, it's a pleasure to meet you as well. Really excited to be here. I've listened to a bunch of your content, Brian, and it's pretty exciting that I'm actually on an episode with you. So grateful for that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm really excited. So
yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for being a listener, and you've also been to one of our weekly networking events, and I hope you keep coming to those. So it was great getting to know you a little bit last weekend, and maybe we'll see you again this Friday too. So let's talk about you now. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and history, and what got you into apartment investing.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Texas, right along the border of Mexico. My father moved there from Maryland, actually, where I was born, but moved pretty young. And he was in the media space. He was operating a local affiliate there, news affiliate, and University of Texas in Austin. I'm Austin based now, and go Horns. And so while here, I actually reconnected with a good buddy of mine who is a pretty successful operator in the commercial space. I grew up with him. We went to school together, elementary and middle school. And so I basically took him to lunch and I said, "Hey, what do you do? I have no idea what you're doing, but I know it's cool. And can you tell me about it?" And it turns out he was in apartments, and that's what he had been doing. He started with a 10 unit and just really exploded from there. Graciously, he invited me to come kind of apprentice with him, and I was kind of dialing a bunch of property owners, seeing if they would sell, and going down lists. And this was 2005 maybe.
Yep.
And eventually he came to me a few months later and he said, "Look, I don't even have time to kind of train you the way I want to, and so I feel like it's doing you a disservice." And so I said, "Hey, no problem." We parted on very good terms. I think at the time I was employee 2 or 3, and he has, I think, over 1,000 employees now or something like that. Yeah, he operates pretty large property management and capital company. But anyway, all that is what kind of got that feel for real estate. All that to be said, I had still no idea what to do in the commercial space. It was just still intimidating to me. So I said, well, I've seen a lot of these flip shows on TV. I know a couple, single family investors.
Yeah,
it seems a little more manageable. And so I actually went off with my father to start an investment and development company in the residential space. And so we operated in San Antonio, and that's leading right into and a little beyond the recession. So fix and flips, new construction, development, luxury townhome project was our big one. And that actually, I can share the story if you want, but that build was leading into and concluded after the big bubble. So that was an interesting project. But yeah, and so I've done a lot on the residential side. Over the last 10 years, I've kind of pivoted more into a 9-to-5 in tech sales and everything software. And but I've never lost that yearning to learn more about commercial and multifamily. And so I've really kind of rededicated my focus there over the last kind of year or so.
Yeah. A lot of similarities. I mean, my first couple of investments were single family, and I kind of did the same thing. Rob mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad. I know, Justin, you nodded your head when you mentioned it too. But I've told this many times on the podcast, but I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I'm like, commercial real estate. That sounds interesting. Too complicated. And I just reverted down to single families. And that's how I got my start in real estate was, this was before fix and flip shows were really on TV. You know, it was just like, well, I can probably figure out how to buy a single family home. And that's what I did. Bought a single family home, moved into it, 6 months later, moved out and put renters in, and did that a couple of times. And so, yeah, now you're trying to get into the multifamily game, and, I love it. I love it. So same question I'm going to ask that I asked Rob, I'm going to ask you. What's your big burning why?
Yeah, I love this question because my wife says I'm pretty emotional, and so I'm tied very much to the burning why. It's really evolved. I would say when I first started in my residential real estate, endeavors back then, it was really about my desire to help and to do what I could to provide a service for others, and that was, whether it's a roof over someone's head, whether it's the ability to help put some income into the pockets of partners and tradespeople and all of these awesome, people that I was connected with and networked with as part of our business. It felt rewarding. And honestly, there was a component that I still love when I was part of building something and I get to drive by and say, hey, we did that. Like it's standing the test of time. And it's my little tiny piece of the pie, my imprint, right, in the world. And I think, I don't know, there's something really profoundly proud I feel when I see that,
Yeah.
That was then. It's honestly become more selfish now, my why. And that's because I became a father. So, 2 years ago, and Rob, you hit it on the head when you were talking about your family, and that's very much strikes a chord with me. It's just, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I had my first, my son, and I call that my inflection point in my life. And that's really, he is the end all be all and the reason I do anything. So everything I'm doing now and why my priorities and kind of strategies have aligned more to what multifamily seems to offer based on everything I'm studying is that I want more time with him. I want the experience to be there. And so that's what drives me now.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah. And my why centers around my family too. I mean, that the moment that I really decided to change was when I realized that I'd missed too many birthdays. I have 5 kids, so 5 whys. When I realized that I had missed, so many birthdays and so many Christmases and so much time, especially with my older daughters that I'll never get back, and now I've got a couple of younger kids. Hopefully I can give them a different childhood than my oldest kids. But something you mentioned about, building, I remember my first job out of high school, I worked for a roofing company and I shingled houses, but just the way you said it brought that memory back to me. I used to, if I was driving by a house that I knew that I had shingled, I would actually go out of my way to drive right in front of the house and look at it and say, yep, we did that. But yeah, it's something that I think it's good to see that you're changing things for the better. And, we've got another complex in Columbia, South Carolina that we purchased. And when we purchased it, you could probably call it a slum. I mean, literally it was that bad, but, we've put, almost $20,000 per unit in to fix it up and make it better. And I drove by that 2 weeks ago and, I had to stop and, just, wow, we did that, and it's amazing what you can do. You can help other people. You can make their living conditions better. And it's a good thing, help a lot of people. So now comes my favorite point of the show where, Justin, I'm going to hand you the mic. So here we go. Justin, we got Rob on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Yeah, definitely want to capitalize on this, Rob. So, speaking of Kiyosaki, I was recently rereading Cash Flow Quadrant, and he's got a passion where he writes that what he calls A students often struggle with analysis paralysis. And that's because of their worry about making mistakes and kind of part of the educational system incentivizing not to. And that's kind of that little trepidation moving into, as we see it, investing in our world. So I've got a little bit of that residential background, but again, like I mentioned earlier, it's different from the commercial space, which is still somewhat intimidating despite the podcasts and the books and the meetups and all of that. So I'm curious, how would you advise somebody kind of in my shoes and taking steps in these early days? And, part B of that is kind of how did you navigate that for yourself in your business?
Well, first of all, congratulations on your son. That's really exciting. I forget who the quote is by, but it's one of my favorite quotes, which is imperfect action beats perfect action, right? In other words, don't get caught up, making sure that everything is perfect. It's better just to go forward. Now, when you talk about analysis, the first thing that comes to mind is an analysis paralysis specifically is the underwriting. And so I don't know if you're underwriting right now, but I can tell you from my experience, that's kind of the first place we started. And we've started educating ourselves and going to these events. And I started underwriting as many deals as I possibly could. And what that did for me in the early days was it developed my knowledge base and my ability to be able to sniff out a good deal from a bad deal, but it also developed my vernacular, right? So you're out there looking for deals, looking for partners, talking with brokers. They can smell it if you're new. And if you speak the language of, apartment investing, it gives you the confidence, and it gives a potential partner the confidence in you. It gives the broker the confidence in you. And I felt, at least in my experience, I'm not saying this is right or wrong place to start, but developing a really good understanding of how to underwrite a deal, how to look at, and the difference between, certain things in a T12, are they capitalizing certain things that they shouldn't be, that are above or below the line. And that comes with repetition, right? And so in the early days, we were just underwriting absolutely anything that walked just to get those reps in. And over time, it developed us, in terms of experience. And you might not think, well, underwriting that's not experience. Well, it is. You're developing the language of the business, and you're developing your sense of being able to point out a good deal versus a bad one.
I would also say with reps and sets, you get to know areas, you get to know what's going on in places, I think one of the keys with my progression was when I actually started trying to focus in one specific area. At first, I was underwriting everything, which I think is important. You're right. The reps and sets are important. But when I started focusing on, two cities, I started seeing trends. I started being able to say, I know what the water bill should be, because out of 20 T12s that I've looked at, the water bill has been about $35 to $40 per unit per month. I know what, insurance should look like here. I know what this should look like there. So there's a lot of it there. And I wholeheartedly agree with I think you said imperfect action beats perfect inaction or something like that, because that's how I did it. I did a lot of trial and error. Looking back at, with the knowledge I have now, I probably would have done it a little differently, but most people just do the trial and error and get better.
Yeah. It can seem overwhelming. And what Brian just said is true. If I could go back in time, I might do it a little bit different, where I'm still doing the reps, underwriting the deals, but I would have also allocated time to networking with more investors, passive investors, and educating those folks as well. It took us a couple of years before we realized the importance of that side of the business, because I think I mentioned it earlier. I mean, the two lowest common denominators are find good deals and find good investors. There's many layers above that: asset management, negotiation, disposition, all of that. But two most basic components: find good deals, find good investors.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great input, and I've got a note here of those two pillars. I think my sales background, I've been told, lends itself a little bit to the capital raising and kind of investor relationship side. So I'm trying to find, as part of that partnership hunt, the complementary experience suite, right, and the personalities that kind of fit that, so that I can add value and make a good partnership there. So that's really really good stuff. Kind of off the back of that, I'm curious. Another common piece of advice that's shared is around having processes and systems in place to grow at a healthy clip, especially in the beginning, and then what it looks like, through maybe the first, second acquisitions and then scaling. But, what I hear a lot is on the system side, I hear a lot about to get systems in place, but not necessarily the tangible tactical aspect of what that means, right? Like what are these systems? So I'm curious in how you would define that for your business, and what that looked like for you in getting some of these actions in place near the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, I got to be honest, when we first got started, again, we're imperfect action. And so we didn't have a lot of systems early on. We knew what we wanted to do and we just went and did it. And at the beginning, it was underwrite deals and network with potential partners. We had no experience. And so subconsciously, I suppose, going to events, networking with people, looking for partners, but it's not like we had a daily sales meeting where we said, okay, today we're going to find a partner and there's a system by which we follow. We were just doing it as we, did a few more deals. I mean, we started developing systems around, the asset management piece, and we're still developing new systems today around, fostering relationships with investors and potential partnership relationships and, our broker relationships. But as far as developing systems, it started slow. And I would say we didn't have any initially, we were just go, right? And as far as today, we're developing systems and we'll probably continue to develop systems for all of time, right? Just always improve, look for better, more efficient ways to do things. So I'm sorry for the bad answer, but initially, we didn't really have many systems. It was just get started someplace,
Yeah. And I'm going to give a similar bad answer. I mean, we've been doing this for 2 years and we're still establishing a lot of the systems. I think some of the systems, like if you only have one property, you don't really need systems. So when you do one property, it's just like, okay, well, we get the financials, we do this, but as you scale and you get more and more properties, now you have to rely on those systems more. So, it's like, okay, now we're getting our monthly reports. So the property manager sends us a whole slew of reports. What do we do with those reports? Well, our asset manager is going to boil the reports down into our KPIs. What are our key performance indicators? What's the vacancy? What's the collections? What are those? So, I mean, we've started, internally doing a lot better on the reporting, and another system, it's just, what are you going to do when? It's like, hey, this is something that's repeatable. It's something we do every month. So every time we do it, we're going to do it exactly the same. Or when we underwrite deals, this is how we're going to underwrite deals. This is how we're going to submit LOIs. Every time we do it, we're going to do it the same. One thing that we've systematized is, for the most part, we're using the same laminate vinyl planks in every single unit, same vendor, same color, same everything. We're using the same ceiling fans, the same lighting, so it helps us with our construction, with our renovation budget, because, we know the cost per square foot of the planking, we know the cost per, every ceiling fan and everything else. So I think a lot of the systems, and we're still developing them, and we've got 500 units right now and soon to be 630-ish, but it's just a matter of looking at the things you do repeatedly and figure out how to save time doing it.
And recognizing bottlenecks, and what you can outsource. I mean, that, I don't know if this would qualify as a system, but, outsourcing certain things that are maybe not the best use of your time. And I know, Brian, you were talking before about virtual assistants. We're also in the process of interviewing and trying to bring on a new VA to help us in our day-to-day, take some things off of my plate that way I can focus on, highest and best use activities.
Yeah, that's been huge too. Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And despite the non-answers, those are very much answers. They're qualified, good answers.
Yeah.
Even if it's not anticipated. So I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah. I'll just say,
I had some super smart, response to that. But in the beginning, I mean, we really just started okay, let's go in this direction, and we did. And
it's a work in progress, and I mean, 2 years after closing on our first property, we're starting to do things, the same way every time. The first couple, you're still learning, you're still figuring out how you want to do things, and then eventually the systems will. I mean, if you want to scale, you have to have the systems.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I mentioned that I was in Austin earlier, and something, Rob, that you mentioned, kind of working Midwest and your most recent deal, being in a little bit of a smaller market. I'm curious to get, your perspective on what it looks like to focus more wholeheartedly in secondary or potentially even tertiary markets. in the modern era of investing and what that looks like. Being Austin based, it's pretty competitive. We all know Austin is a super huge growth market, and there are a number of eyes on everything in the outlying areas. So, personally, I'm also trying to potentially look into something that's, a secondary market myself. So I'm just curious your perspective. Do you see that trend as well? And just what are your thoughts on that in terms of competition, in terms of how that affects your business model and whatnot?
Lots to unpack there. The short answer is I love secondary and tertiary markets with some exceptions. We typically like to see a minimum population in a metro of 100,000 people. I've looked at deals in cities that have 20,000, and to us, it's all about risk-adjusted return for our investing partners. And it just feels like these smaller markets, it feels a little too risky. Now you get compensated in the higher cap rates in some of these tertiary, super tertiary places, but to us, it doesn't justify that kind of risk. I know Austin is extremely competitive right now. One of the hottest markets in the country. There are some areas outside of that we really like, in between Austin and San Antonio, places like San Marcos, Temple, and Killeen, Texas. I mean, that whole area, that corridor between Austin and San Antonio, we really like a lot. But in general, when you're out there looking at deals, if it's in a core metro versus a secondary or tertiary area, in today's marketplace, we're not seeing wild differences in cap rate. Like I said, unless you go to some super tertiary with 10, 20,000 population, you might find a 6 or maybe a 7 cap. But if it's yield you're chasing, I would focus a lot more on the areas, demographic profile, job growth, future rent growth, net positive migration patterns, these types of things, to make sure that it truly is a good area. Because right now, today's phase of the real estate cycle, it's not like you're going to go to a tertiary and find some 8 cap rate. I mean, people are chasing deals all over the place and paying through the nose for them. That's not to say that there aren't great deals out there, because I believe we can all make money in any phase of the cycle. And I think there's great deals out there today, right now. It's just, don't be fooled by, a little bit higher cap rate in a market that still doesn't have those good underlying fundamentals.
Yeah, I agree with a lot. I mean, the trend in demographics is the same as the trend in investing. A lot of people are moving out of the metros. I mean, Austin's still growing, yes, but a lot of people are moving out of the high cost of living, high population density, and actually they're moving from cold to warm too. So they're moving from high cost of living to low cost of living, high population density to low population density, and cold to warm in a lot of areas. So, you see that happening, and people are moving to tertiary markets a lot more, and investors are moving to tertiary markets. I mean, we're under contract right now for 144 unit property in a city that's got like 80,000 with when you add the metro area in, it's a hub city, but when you add the metro area in, you look at 200,000, and we're getting it at a low 5 cap rate. So a lot of the investors are looking for the secondary and tertiary markets for yields. You just have to be careful. It's something that we like. We like growth corridors. So we've targeted the I-85 corridor between Atlanta and Charlotte. Atlanta is growing, Charlotte's growing, and everything that's fueling the growth in those two cities is present along the I-85 corridor. And when you look at where growth happens, those major corridors are the first place. That's where things start to expand. They start to expand along these freeways. And the next exit down starts to build. So when you look at those corridors, you just got to look at population dynamics and where things go. And incidentally, I moved to Idaho Falls 2 weeks ago. It's one of the fastest growing communities, and I've spent a lot of time on my motorcycle cruising around looking for where the growth is, which direction it's going. And I think that's really what you want to look at is, if you're looking in those secondary and tertiary markets, are they in that path of progress, or are they out in the sticks? If they're out in the sticks, I think your risk is going to be a little higher. If they're on one of those growth corridors, I think you got a better shot. That said, we are about out of time. Time flew. This actually went by super quick, but thanks to both of you for coming on the show. I got one last question for each of you. Rob, you go first. How can the listeners learn more about you?
Thanks for having me, Brian and
Yeah.
Justin. I appreciate you coming on the show. It was great to meet you. Would love to continue dialogue with you and help in any way that I can. People can reach me on LinkedIn, Rob Overstreet, or email rob@harbordriveholdings.com. Or if you'd like to learn more about our business, go check out our website, harbordriveholdings.com. There's an option at the upper right corner of the webpage. If you'd like, you can join our investor club. We send our investors lots of cool resources and things to educate them on some of the benefits and trends and things happening today. So if you'd like to learn more about our company, you can join our investor club straight on our homepage of our website, harbordriveholdings.com.
All right. And we'll put all that information in the show notes. So if you want to connect with him with LinkedIn, send him an email, check out his website. It'll be in the show notes. Justin, same question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, pretty much most of the social media channels. LinkedIn is probably one of the better places to reach me. I'm pretty communicative, so if anybody messages or comments, I'll pretty much get back to anybody. So I would say, yeah, LinkedIn for now. For all the branding and whatnot, hopefully coming soon. So we'll save that for a later date.
All right, sounds great. Once again, thank you two gentlemen for coming on the show today. This was a lot of fun. Hope to see you guys both again soon sometime.